have as my guest critical thinker, Thorsteinn Siglaugsson, who is in Iceland, and he's going to tell us about himself and some of his concepts, thoughts, and actions of late, writings.
Hi, Randy. Happy to be with you. It's been a while, right? It was some point last year we spoke. Okay, so let me just introduce myself very briefly. So basically, I've been involved in writing a bit about COVID and stuff like that over the past couple of years. But actually, what I do mostly is to train people in critical thinking, and that's I'm working with a colleague. We're running an online course to do that, and it's I've come to the conclusion actually that after all this time and thinking back and forth that it's actually lack of critical thinking is a very big part of all this COVID scare that we've been experiencing, and so that's that way maybe now recently my work is starting to mix in with my views on healthcare and public health.
So you were talking about a little earlier in our green room about Immanuel Kant and the philosopher. Tell us a little bit about how you came across this, what his thoughts were in the 18th century, whether this is a new problem, and how he addressed it.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, I don't remember why I was doing it, but I just pulled out this paper that Kant wrote. Immanuel Kant is one of the big philosophers, and I actually wrote my BA thesis in philosophy on him, on his ethics. And in 1784, he wrote a short piece, which is called "An Answer to the Question: What is Enlightenment?" And this is basically the first sort of that I know of really a good treatise on critical thinking and on free speech also. And he defines enlightenment basically as, he says, enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without guidance from another. This immaturity is self-imposed when its cause lies not in lack of understanding, but in lack of resolve and courage to use it without guidance from another. Sapere Aude. Have courage to use your own understanding. That's the motto of the Enlightenment.
So that's Latin. Sapere is knowledge, and audere is like audacity. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically have the courage to know. You could say.
So to know bravely in a way, I guess.
Yeah, and then he goes on to talk about how the reason, the core reason for the lack of enlightenment is really laziness and cowardice, which is a good, I think. And he sees the freedom of speech as both a necessary and a sufficient cause for enlightenment. So he was optimistic. Those guys, the Enlightenment guys, they were really very optimistic people. And maybe we might say today that he was perhaps a little bit too optimistic, because even if since then, we've had since the late 18th century, free speech started to really flourish, but we still don't have the Enlightenment. We still have people who, even if they can express themselves and are free to do so, they don't. And that's the laziness. So the chain of events maybe that Kant expected didn't take place. But there might also be another reason why that was. And this is how people's freedom of speech is suppressed in their occupations. So if you work as let's say a big five consultant or a lawyer or a banker or something like that, and it's basically the brightest people who go into those firms. They don't dare talk about their opinions, they cannot talk publicly. And what Kant stresses very much in this, very strongly in this paper, is that a requirement for enlightenment also is this freedom to speak freely in the public sphere, you know, even if you cannot do that in your occupation. And he uses the example of a priest, for example, who's he's got to read the scriptures and basically do everything as per the orders of the church when he's working. But he should be able to go to the pub after work and just blast the church, and all their the structure and their teachings and everything. He should have this freedom. But then, because I'm running a website here in Iceland, it's sort of a publication. We publish articles on the freedom of speech, and this is run by the Icelandic Society for Free Speech, which I'm chairman of now, and and I speak to a lot of people, and I speak to people who are, working in organizations like this, and they say, Can I publish anonymously? Because if I publish under my own name, I'm just going to be fired tomorrow. And this is a big issue, because if you just think of all the brain power that's being trapped this way, it's very serious. It's a very serious issue.
Yeah. So you bring up a lot of
yeah.
I
And
apologize.
this is sorry. Yeah, I just talk too much.
No. I obviously I'm the one who does that, and I apologize in advance. But you bring up a lot of questions that occur to me, and I'll just flip them out there, and we can touch on any of these topics as we go. First of all, how does one get to be a philosopher? You don't kind of go to maybe wake up and think I'm going to open up my philosophy store, and people are going to come and buy some philosophy from me. So I'm wondering, what is the space in which allows philosophers? I don't think that they're like, I doubt North Korea has philosophers.
No,
I think there has to be kind of the space within a society where you have enough excess time and you have enough wealth, prosperity, lack of famine, that kind of stuff to start having philosophers who are going to be managing people's thoughts because they have some free time in which to exercise their thoughts. That's question number one. How does one become a philosopher? How did Immanuel Kant become a philosopher? How does philosophy come to have influence over us? What's its place and so forth? So that's kind of one bracket of questions. The other one is about the priest off duty. I mean, are we prepared? I don't think we're the pre-enlightenment, and just as a side note, the Enlightenment's kind of a I don't know if you know this word, but kind of a snooty term. It's in a sense begging the question that before them was darkness. And I think the people in the Middle Ages wouldn't necessarily buy into that. They had their own thing going, and they might have had thoughts and whatnot. But enlightenment is a way, it's a pejorative term in a sense to the pre-enlightenment. And so this concept that the enlightened, we are enlightened, they are dark. And there was much more religious time. And so that brings up a kind of a separate paradox for me, which is that the people who are doing all this thinking and whatnot, when we have the time to think, they are lacking the bravery. So you probably know the game rock, paper, scissors. There's kind of a triangle of hierarchy where there's no real hierarchy. It's kind of like an MC Escher spiral going nowhere. So the rock, paper, scissors, the rock beats the scissors beats the paper beats the rock. So Immanuel Kant wants enlightenment, and he wants people to have critical thinking, but can they do it without bravery? And bravery, in a sense, comes from the spiritual knowledge that there's an afterlife. I think. I mean, just very broadly speaking, it can come from a lot of places, but oftentimes the bravest soldiers are the ones who are willing to give their life because they have the comfort of knowing that their cause is good. And if you don't have an actual cause and umbrella, you wind up in kind of this, materialist world, which kind of the Marxians have taken over, where there's cowardice, and people, go in lockstep because that's the comfort thing, and we go back to the herd as opposed to the family, the individual. Anyway, so sorry about that. Clearly, I talk too much. So, maybe I don't know if you have any sensibility about any of those things I've just mentioned.
Yeah, I think basically the Enlightenment. I agree. It's a complicated concept really, and you have to look at it in the context of the society at the time and so on. But basically, what's happening then is that scientific thinking is taking off, and people are starting to doubt the teachings of the church and so on. And the Enlightenment is, the way Kant describes it or explains it is this emergence from the self-imposed immaturity. And the immaturity, as he sees it, is not thinking for yourself, not taking advantage of your ability to think for yourself. And this is something that's, to me, this is the heart of the Enlightenment. It's basically about thinking for yourself, having the courage to use your own understanding. And this is very much a key. And this is, and if you look at society today, we look at society in 1784, which was a very different society. Anyhow, in Prussia, where Kant lived, the king basically said, say whatever you want, just as long as you obey me. But there was total freedom of speech there. When we look at society today, and we're seeing this all the time, and it's getting worse and worse. We don't have freedom of speech anymore. I was just yesterday. I was handing in a paper to Parliament committee here in Iceland about a proposal for some attack on hate speech. They want to set up some body to basically limit hate speech. And what I found was that my colleague called me and he said he saw that our paper, which we handed in to the committee, had been somehow hidden away, and there was a lot of fuss. And then one of the members of Parliament, or the Speaker of Parliament, called me up and excusing, with excuses about this and so on, and confirmed that we would be invited to come and meet with the committee, because we were very critical. Our Icelandic Free Speech Society, we were very critical of this, because it basically means that you're handing over the power to define what is hate speech and what is not hate speech, handing it over to some, contractors, some external consultants who nobody knows who are, and then that means slowly, their definitions of what is hate speech will seep into the legislation. So if they decide, saying that obesity is a public health problem is hate speech against the obese, then that's hate speech. So this is how those things happen. And it seems that people just, the majority of people, I think, they just sincerely believe that things like what they want to define as hate speech should just be suppressed. And if you ask them who should be the judge of what is hate speech, they cannot answer, of course, but they just feel very strongly that because it's bad to say something mean about people, it should be banned by law, So people mix up basically what the legal requirements should be, and with their own sense of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate to say. And this is the opposite of enlightenment. It's absolutely the opposite of enlightenment. And at least in Kant's time, people understood the importance of this. But now they don't seem to do that, and that's the really scary thing, I think.
So you brought up an interesting point about monarchy, that I mean, here's a question. I mean, first of all, the fact that there needs to be an Icelandic free speech society, almost like the Enlightenment term,
Yeah.
it makes me think of the opposite. So the Enlightenment is against a presumed dark age, and the fact that there's an Icelandic free speech society means that there is some oppression or suppression of free speech. So you don't have a group unless you need to have a purpose for that group. But I guess a question would be, I mean, there's so many questions. One of them is, are we capable of free speech and free thought? Oh, the question I actually had was about Immanuel Kant. So oddly, we think of the monarchies as a time we don't want to go back to because there's no democracy, there's no power. But oddly enough, it sounds to me as if there might have been freer thought for them.
Yeah, of course it can. It can be, but I think still, you can have enlightened monarchs, of course, but there's no reassurance that the sun is going to be enlightened as well, and so I think Kant actually discusses this in his paper also, where he says that it is possible that political freedom may lead to suppression of free speech. That's a very interesting thought, I think, and maybe that's something that's happening. But generally speaking, I think democracy is the best way to ensure free speech and ensure enlightenment.
Well,
but at the same time,
I'm sorry, I apologize. I would have a caveat there. It's not democracy per se. Democracy can breed tyranny, as we saw in a lot of the parliamentary democracies, New Zealand and Australia during COVID. Very impressive place.
There are more things that I needed to think. I think democracy by itself is not enough. I think it's thinking of the political system, democracy is probably the best system to ensure free speech, but also to ensure free speech and to make sure that people think for themselves. You need more things, and you need one key thing that you need is to actually train children in critical thinking, and this is something that is absolutely missing from the school system. And what I do is to train executives in critical thinking. It's to train them to correctly, logically analyze problems within the companies and do this using logical rigor. And it's hard work. And we're working with people. Most of our students are people from some of the biggest corporations in the world, and they're high up in their companies. Those are the best of the brightest. But still, they often find this really, really hard. They often find it really, really hard to think clearly. And why is that? It's not because those stupid people, because they're very bright. But they haven't had that training, and this training is entirely missing, more or less, from the education system. People aren't trained to think logically.
So, but a question, let's say they're bright, and let's say they're trained to do this critical thinking, but it's not part of the team sport. Like, I watch basketball and football, and if one of them is an excellent golfer, I think the Celtics have one guy who's on the team. He's a top golfer, but he plays basketball. He's making his money playing basketball, but his golf skills, if he got them better and better golf skills, it's not going to help him get on the basketball team. No, and so, within the parameters of winning in basketball, he has to be, following the rules. And the fact that he can, has much more subtlety in his golf game, so forth, is extracurricular. And it's nice, but nobody's going to reward him in the basketball world. So just to use that as an analogy.
Yeah, this is true, and this is a little bit different, a different issue, I think, because the issue I'm talking about here is basically, the ability to think clearly. The other thing is, of course, that when you're working within a company, within an organization, a big organization, you have to play by the rules, and you have to do all sorts of things that even you might feel are really stupid things, and where you're of the opinion that things are not the way they should be. and that's that's another thing actually, and this is what happens in every organization. There are all sorts of norms that form over time, and rules and procedures and stuff like that. And but the people that we are training, they're people who actually realize that you have to break through all of these, and this is why they're studying critical thinking, why they're studying logical thinking, because they're aiming to be able to see the organization as a whole system, which is the key to all improvements. So they realize that, but still, even with just very simple, simple logical analysis can be really hard for people who are for a PhD in whatever. That's just the way it is. And there's a lot of work to be done there. But I think basically it starts in the schools. It starts in the schools. It's because the school. What is the school really? If you think about it, the ideal with public schooling was to make children able to to educate them, to make them able to think for themselves and so on. But today, I think schools and even universities are very much about training people to conform. It's not about they're not being urged to or encouraged to think for themselves and stand out. It's like young ladies being trained in Victorian times how to behave when they were being introduced at the court. That's the schooling. It's about conforming to society, following the herd. And this is really worrying. And when you have an education system like that, you're working against critical thinking, and you're working against the freedom of expression. And if you don't have critical thinking and you don't have the freedom of expression, so that we tie it in with what we talked about earlier with democracy, then you cannot have actually a healthy democracy. Because a healthy democracy, it requires those two cornerstones to be in place.
So there's a lot there to parse. Have you had so I'm part of an angel group, and we listen to companies give their pitches for financing, and a fair number of them over the years have been companies that want to make things work better within the organization. So we listened to a company last night that wants to use AI to help the communication between managers and employees. So many employees are dissatisfied, and there's a lot of French have a word, anomie, namelessness. People don't feel appreciated, respected, and they leave jobs much more frequently. They're moving around. They're kind of like not just a chess piece on a board, but they're chess pieces moving between boards and trying different games, trying checkers, all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of flux. And maybe it speaks to unhappiness. I'm not sure whether the opposite is what we want, kind of structure, kind of the old Japanese model of living and dying with your company. But it brings up some questions like what does humanity want? Humanity wants feelings. It doesn't necessarily want critical thinking. People don't like the truth. There's a famous Jack Nicholson, I think it's A Few Good Men movie line. It's like, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. Are we better off being shielded from the truth? What is the truth? How is the truth achieved? What happened for all these concepts during COVID? And did COVID present an experiment in say, kind of monarchical structure? Anyway, there's a lot of dialogue and interplay between those.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to pick up your point regarding this and using AI to improve communications, that's pretty interesting way of looking at things, because traditionally AI has been about machines, and then you have the human touch, and that's about humans. So now you want to use AI to actually replace the humans, to give management probably a more human touch. I don't know. Of course, I don't know anything about this company, but it sounds a bit like that. And I actually think that there's a lot of possibilities with AI, and I've been exploring ways to use it in our work, basically to help people to improve their logical thinking, and there are possibilities to do that. That's very interesting. But this dissatisfaction within companies is, in essence, it's about, basically, if you look at the company as a system, which is what you should do if you want to be successful with running it. You have to see it as a whole system. But you also have to realize that within this system, there are independent subsystems, and those can be, organizational groups, maybe groups of people, or simply individuals. And the organization as a system has a goal. It has its own goal that it's striving toward. Whether it's a non-profit trying to eliminate poverty, or it's a bank trying to maximize its profits, the system always has a goal. But this doesn't mean that goal is necessarily the goal of all the subsystems, all the individuals. They all have their own goals, their own individual goals, and I think, to simplify it very much, the reason you'll have dissatisfaction within companies, the core reason is when the goal of the subsystem is not aligned with the goal of the organization. So there is a conflict between them. That's when you get these this friction. So I don't think it's a part of it is, of course, has to do with communication and about being nice to your co-workers and stuff like that. But the core, when there is deep dissatisfaction by somebody working within an organization, it's because he doesn't feel he or she is fitting in with the overall goal of the company and everything that leads from that goal. Mm-hmm. So that's I think that's the key, and I think it's one of the things that we are teaching people to do is on the personal level to envisage and confirm to themselves somehow what their goal in life is, because this is the key to personal happiness. A lot of people do not do this. They jump from, and it's people are always dealing with some problems at a lower level without really thinking about their goal in life. It's like, just an example that I was looking at yesterday. A very classic example is this loop that people go through regarding nutrition. So you want to eat healthy food, and you start eating healthy food, and it doesn't taste good, and you're not happy. So you start eating tasty food, and it isn't healthy, and so you go around and around and around in a circle. And maybe the question then is, okay, what is it you're trying to achieve? And you try this diet and that diet and that diet, and you're never happy, and you never achieve what you're trying to do. So this is when you don't have a clear goal, basically.
No, it's interesting because you're talking about Kant had talked about immaturity. That needs to obviously be defined as a term. I'm just going to give you one quick anecdote. In the before times, before COVID, and I want to get to your article as well, so I want people to get to see and follow your article, Stas. But I was at a kind of a networking party at a business place, and they had some beautiful hors d'oeuvres there, and there was this beef satay, beef on a stick, kind of barbecue, and the guy about my age is he's kind of like the kid outside the bakery. He's like staring at the food there, and I'm not a mind reader, but I'm looking over at him and I'm looking at the beef and I grab one. I'm like, they're really good. It's delicious. And let me just point out your dilemma. And he kind of looks at me like, what? I said, well, I know you're looking at that beef. You really want it, but you're thinking, how is this going to affect my health? Raise my cholesterol, my heart attacks, all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to cut to the chase here, but let's think about this logically. So that piece of beef there, maybe even two of them, let's say it takes off 30 seconds of your life at the far end when you're 90. Okay, so you could spend 30 seconds here thinking about whether you want it, but that's going to take 30 seconds away from your life as well, in a sense, because you're kind of transfixed by this dilemma. So if you eat the beef, you'll have maybe a few minutes of pleasure, plus the satisfaction of free will and doing what you want and being kind of like that kind of joyous thing when you're a little bit drunk and you tell the world. Screw your rules. I'm me.
Yeah, I'm gonna eat a thief. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're gonna be able to feel that rejuvenation of your spirit by having the beef. And how many sets of 30 seconds or a minute is that worth? That might last a few days because you've asserted yourself, and you're happy. So he's looking at me like I'm half savant and half crazy, and I'm happy to put that on my epitaph. But so he looks at it, he grabs the steak, he eats it, and is like, wow, that is so delicious. Thank you so much. And I don't know if we chatted after that. But this is the dilemma, that people, people, and again, I kind of come back to this concept of religion. People are religious. And there's the church, and there's various churches, and there's all kinds of different religions. But absent those, there are still religions. And people aspiring and ascribing to these as well. A lot of what he's making a supposition of about the sanctity of broccoli and the sin of beef are religious suppositions, because frankly, we are carnivores. Like every animal that looks straight ahead, we're carnivores. And teleologically, we hunted animals and maybe insects or whatever, any number of creepy crawly things, and we ate them. And probably we can eat other things, clearly, because we can. People can survive as vegetarians and whatnot. But this nobody goes to a barbecue for tofu. I'm going to have a tofu barbecue tomorrow. I want everybody to come. When I'm in the neighborhood and a certain time of year, like springtime, and I smell somebody's barbecue, it's like there's all flood of emotions, and that never happens when I see a carrot. I'm not against carrots. I'll eat them, but I've never romanticized about a carrot, and I don't think even if people barbecued them, I don't think I would just like slither over to the thing and try to ingratiate myself. Anyway, but a lot of I don't know. I'm just curious a little bit about the history of Immanuel Kant in a way. I did not do philosophy much in college. I was chemistry and physics, and a lot of this stuff is new to me. But how did this play out? And are you familiar with Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton?
Yes. Yeah.
So he was more of a writer, and oftentimes a detective writer. But I think he's a apologian. He's an apologist in the old sense of the word. He's making arguments for religion and God. And his statement was, when you believe in nothing, you'll believe in everything or anything, maybe everything as well. Have we diverged? To what extent is COVIDism or COVIDianism? Here in the U.S. we had the branch Covidians as a cult back in the 90s, I think. And so there was in Waco, Texas, David Koresh, who took on kind of a Talmudic name. His name is David Smith or David Jones, whatever. And he took on Koresh because it has kind of a quasi mystical connotation. So he had a mystical name, and he had his, I think, Covidians. And have we come up with the branch, they call the branch Covidians? Have we come up with branch Covidianism as say a religion of recent times? I see people outside gardening now, like literally yesterday, with a mask on. I saw this woman on a electric skateboard with no helmet. She's zipping along traffic, presumably at some risk to herself. And God bless her, she's having fun, but she's fully masked.
Of course, yeah.
So it's not like people, I'm sure she has a branch, getting back to branch, she has got a branch, a logical tree of reasons why she's doing this and not that. And maybe she's having her bliss, she's following her bliss and so forth. Are humans capable of individualism? Are they capable of rational thought? Do they really want it? And where does this all lead? And maybe we can kind of segue into your article that we were talking about earlier.
It's it's basically the religion. What is religion? It's I think we've got to distinguish between actually religion and the sort of artifacts like masks and stuff like this. That's not religion really. Religion is a worldview. That's a coherent view of the world. It's not just about believing in some totem. It's and I think the COVID. How to think about it. I think I do agree broadly with the psychologist Matthias Desmay, who's basically interpreted this as a symptom of the which is essentially a consequence of the Enlightenment. You can see the Enlightenment as there are two sort of routes. It's the way towards critical thinking and independence and personal responsibility and all of that, and then there's the mechanistic route. And the mechanistic route is basically that the whole world is like a machine, and that everything can be explained without any reference to religion or feelings or anything like that. It's all just some stuff, and that everything is pretty much predetermined, and you can basically manage the world entirely. And this is what people try to do. This is sort of the madness behind the lockdowns, behind the very idea that you could, just get rid of a contagious virus just by locking people up in their homes for a while. It's a mad idea. It's a totally mad idea because it doesn't take into account the way society works. So it's we could say two things about it. One is that it's it's madness. Obviously, it's a consequence of the mechanistic thinking. And third, maybe it's a consequence of the lack of the ability to think systematically, because thinking systematically, with systems thinking, is basically about seeing, the whole system, not just a tiny little part of it. But what happened, and this is what Desmay explains in his book on the psychology of totalitarianism, is that the focus. People's focus was narrowed so extremely that they saw nothing but the virus, and that was the only objective was to conquer the virus. And just this morning I got so angry because I read this article about how Japanese school kids, 35% of them still wear masks.
Yes.
Because, and those, it's only 10% of them who actually don't wear masks, I think, even though they're not required to wear masks anymore, But so 90% still wear masks, but 35% of them wear masks because they don't want their faces to be seen. And this is pretty scary, This is so mad. And also this, which is shown here, the suicides, that jumped up in 2020, and they're not going down; they're going up still, And but this thing, just this simple thing, there's a religious sort of artifact, which is a mask, which has been it's been known the whole time that it doesn't work. It doesn't limit contagion, and this has been known the whole time, you know. And we've been lied to the whole time that no, they do work, you know, and people have believed this. It's basically just like, you know, having a necklace of garlic around your neck to drive away vampires. You know, that's basically what the masks do. And then, you know, the logic is the same. Okay, so if I if I ask you, Randy, why are you wearing that necklace of that garlic necklace? Well, it's to drive away vampires. I said, how do you know it works? Well, do you see any vampires around?
Exactly.
So,
my father,
so it's yeah, but I think this single thing, you know, 35% of Japanese children wearing masks without being required to, because they don't want to show their faces.
no, it's
This
an incredible
is
thing.
everything.
It's an incredible thing.
This is a consequence of this madness. And you know, this madness is, where does it end really? Where does this madness end? And it's a bit interesting to think about it, that in 2020, I think it was 2020 rather than 19. Yeah, it was just around this time when COVID started. I read this book by Michel Houellebecq, a French novelist,
Yes.
who is a fan of Schopenhauer's philosophy. Schopenhauer's philosophy is basically very gloomy, and Schopenhauer is basically of the opinion that that people are a nuisance and we should avoid them at all costs. But Houellebecq, he writes this novel. It's called Possibility of an Island, that describes a world that's like that, where people live in isolation and they never meet another living being. And this chimes in a bit with Desmai's conclusion on what is the ultimate logical conclusion of the mechanistic worldview. And that's a body, an unconscious body, lying on IV, you know, and drip, basically, and being sustained.
Like the Matrix kind of.
It's just an unconscious body, perfectly safe in a vault somewhere, perfectly safe. There are no viruses around, you know. There are no cars. There's no danger, but it's perfect safety. It's the perfect safety, and it's the perfect safety that's. And it's actually interesting to think about it in the context of AI, because you mentioned AI a little bit earlier. I read this article in Time by, I don't remember his name, but he's one of those AI gurus of the world, and he's talking about those models and what may happen if they become sort of autonomous. And he says the only possible conclusion from that is going to be the extermination of all biological life on Earth. And why is that? It's because when the model, you know, and you know about models, you know, models are supposed to reflect reality, but they never do, because reality is multi, and reality you can't ever fit it into the model. It's always going to go astray. And but once the AI discovers, you know, what a nuisance humans are, and animals and plants as well, and all that stuff, you know, all that dirt in the world is, then the obvious logical conclusion is to exterminate it, and then everything will fall into place, and it will fit perfectly with the model. So the only reality that remains is going to be the model.
Well, it's an interesting.
That's a culmination of the mechanistic thinking.
Yeah. So I've had talks with Jeffrey Tucker, the head of Brownstone, and recently Jay Bhattacharya, and in my discussion with him last Friday, we talked about this kind of clean and unclean. And Mr. Tucker had an article in Brownstone, which is just and Epic Times, I think, which is a great article about this concept of clean and unclean. And you know, Jay Bhattacharya, I think, is originally from India. And obviously they have, you know, a caste system, and, you know, to use a pun, you know, some people are cast off or cast away, and I think it's the Dalit are the unclean, and there's certain tasks in society that are left to them. And then public health has used this concept of clean and unclean, and been sometimes corrupted. The Nazi example comes to mind,
Yep,
but it's
yep,
been in other societies as well, where certain people and groups are determined to be unclean and not useful. People are shocked that there are no dogs in say Iran, whatever, but dogs are unclean. We like dogs and we love them. We have puppies and all that kind of stuff. And there's societies where dogs are determined to be unclean, and if they're out and about, and semi-wild and whatnot. And then that can be extrapolated to certain groups of people are unclean. They are effectively vectors for literal disease, or they are the disease themselves. And so, we have a blur. So getting back to this kind of religious thing, I'm not sure that people want to be. There are, I say, leaders, and the people you're talking about potentially, yes, they can use that knowledge as critical thinkers. And the idea of liberal arts, originally from the Romans is libera. This freedom, the people who are going to be free men, free citizens, but that's so they can manage and operate the society, which had a lot of people who were not free men. So they were managing a machine of Roman society, which needed for its parts, labor. They didn't have automobiles. They didn't have the combustion engine. They didn't have cotton gins and all that kind of stuff. So they had humans do their stuff, build their roads and whatnot. In order to manage them, you had to be cognizant of the liberal arts. Now we send everybody to college to pursue the liberal arts, but they're not necessarily all applicable to them, because we don't have, say, that same. I mean, maybe we're getting this kind of immigrant underclass, whatever, churning people through society, but we don't have fixed categories such as the Romans did. But I'm not sure that everyone really is fit for this kind of liberal arts thing. So I'm not sure it's a good thing or bad thing if some people are doing more technical knowledge. I think there's a lot of benefit, when you're in a nursing home.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
When you're in a nursing home, you don't want somebody coming in, as much as we have loved discussing Immanuel Kant, we don't want somebody coming in and you're sitting wet in your bed. Some nurse is going to come in and discuss philosophy. You want somebody to clean the sheets and or take your EKG and draw your blood. You need somebody technically competent.
Absolutely, and I think the value of philosophy is not that everybody becomes a philosopher, because that would be awful. If people were all true philosophers, they would just keep walking around and staring at the sky and thinking about the stars all the time. That would end badly, I think. But I think still when we talk about the mechanistic view of the world, it's more about a paradigm. It's a paradigm that's replaced, and it's sort of replaced religion in a way. But people don't realize, of course, they think, the better technology we have, the better lives we're going to lead. But this is not necessarily true, But this is the general belief, and this is a part of the mechanistic view of the world. I think one of the best weeks ever I've spent somewhere was in a pretty undeveloped village in India 3 years ago. Everything was very basic, and you would just basically eat the food picked from the garden and cooked over an open fire, and there was no TV and no distraction. Basically, there's no Western toilets and stuff like that. It was really a very enjoyable time, and those people really enjoyed their life, even though they were poor, and even though they were belonged to the class of the untouchables, and they took care of the farms, and they didn't do badly, they did quite well, but you obviously had the caste system, so this simple life, and it can be very enjoyable and much more enjoyable than living in a city and striving for more and more things and more and more money, So I think it's this mechanistic view of the world that's based on the idea that technology is going to save us all, and then we have that AI thing, where people are starting to worry that the technology is actually not going to save us all; it's going to eat us all, for
Right.
breakfast.
I'm not so much worried about the eating us all part. I'm worried
No,
about. I'm worried
definitely.
about. So I had Paul Freiters on, an economist, and he was talking about. I'm not going to be able to spend enough time on this, but basically kind of the godlike aspect that we have a reverence, and whether we wind up revering the AI because we have, say, this God-sized hole in our hearts or our minds
Mm.
that needs something like that. And then secondarily, I have this article. I don't want to maybe promote my stuff before yours, but I have this article out recently um, called Chat CCP, the know-it-all with flair, chatbot's hidden agenda. And mind you, all the illustrations I got from AI. And basically the essence of this is whether there's a tincture. I mean, oranges actually often are green, and they're bathed in ethylene gas, and they immediately turn orange. So it's a false appearance. There's basically a facade layer over. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't showing the actual article. I'm sorry about that. So this is the article, and it's in Joel Smalley's blog. It's actually kind of written by me over here. But so here's the picture in the article. But and so the problem that I have is that the kind of the glazing or the coloring of what we are consuming as knowledge, and these are oranges we're consuming, is applied not by the AI per se, but which is really a look, kind of a squinting at the internet at any given moment, but applied by our betters, by certain elites, and to have a certain point of view. And so the article goes on and on and on, but basically there's things you can ask AI and get an answer, and things you cannot. So that comes back to a lot of the COVID stuff. If you ask it, is natural immunity a stronger immunity? Even as Dr. Fauci said in 2004, is it a stronger immunity than vaccine immunity? And you'll get, the current Fauci thought. You'll get the what I call the bought, BOUGHT, the purchased Fauci bot. So it's a bought Fauci bot rather than the actual scientific critical thinking Dr. Fauci. And I give him credit. I think he's a smart guy. I think he was cum laude. He was a graduated well, and he knows how to read and so forth. And at times he's been very straightforward, and then times he's not. So the critical thinking is okay, but then it can be co-opted and purchased. And I think this is a whole regulatory capture aspect of the public health industry that listens either numerically, materialistically, or mechanistically, however you want to put it, to the finances and or politics of the time. So I think Fauci has had his opinions go all over the place. Masks are good, masks are bad. We should wear one, we should wear zero, we should wear two, based on the exigencies of the moment. And that's where things start to falter. Anyway, so that's a little bit too much about my thing. I want to kind of talk, if we can, about your article. If you want to spend a few minutes on this, we're rounding about the hour. And so maybe just a few minutes here, I'm going to show people your article, and maybe we'll end it about how they can keep up with you and contact you as well. So this is in Brownstone, and the chief cause of problems is bad solutions. So that's a little bit like the cart before the horse. Maybe you can tell us what you mean by this, and what kind of information we can have. And for the people who are trying to make actionable knowledge of what you're saying, how do they benefit?
It's basically what I'm trying to explain in this article is actually how not having clear how we basically always trying to solve problems, right? But most of the time the problems we're trying to solve are not actual problems. They're just symptoms of a possible underlying problem. And the reason that we keep trying to solve problems that aren't problems is when we don't have a clear goal, whether it's for a company or for ourselves, basically. And that's that's what leads us to all of those issues. Let's say, let's see this. Yeah, this Ellie Goldratt basically was a management thinker in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s actually, and he wrote about this basically, how realizing what the goal of an organization is the key to everything. It's the key to all improvement. As long as you don't know what the goal of the organization is, then you won't be able to improve it. And the same at the personal level. The goal of a human being is to live a full life, Goldratt said, and then there are requirements for that. But you always have to keep this goal in mind, and that's actually, that goal. You might dispute it. Maybe the goal is for some person is just to clean a hotel or something, but I doubt that it is like that, or just to be completely safe on IV in a vault. That's probably not going to be a goal for humans. So this chimes in very much with the ideals of the Enlightenment, actually, that and also with the philosophy of Aristotle. That it's what he sees in nature. Aristotle sees in nature is that everything strives to grow and become better, and so that should also be our goal. But in order to reach that goal, you have to be able to think clearly. You have to be able to realize what your goal actually is, and you have to be able to think clearly so that you can determine what is really necessary for me to achieve my goal and what is not. And it's this exclusion of all the other stuff that isn't necessary. That's the start. And then you can ask, okay, there are maybe 2 or 3 factors that are necessary for me to achieve my goal. Am I perhaps not achieving them? And if I'm not, then I have actually the suggestion for what might be a problem. So basically, just like in a company, if the goal is to reach maximum profits, and in order to that you have to maximize revenue and minimize costs. And if you're not maximizing revenue, you're not minimizing costs. That's an indication. That's an undesirable effect of something that is underlying. And then the next step in the process is basically to analyze, why do I not have this? Why are my costs always too high in my business? What's the reason for that? And that's where the logical analysis comes in, and where you go into the root cause analysis of that. And this kind of root cause analysis, it calls for a lot of rigor. You have to follow the logical rules. But fortunately, those rules all exist. And it's easy to find them on the web. They were developed by Aristotle, actually, long time ago.
So did Aristotle have his own website?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, it's called Aristotle.com. Yeah, he still runs it.
So we're going to have to end. I want people to be able to find you, so I'm going to put up some posts here, so people can take a look at your work. You have this book here. It's almost a similar syllogism from symptoms to causes, applying the logical thinking process to an everyday problem. So people can buy that. I already have. I've not finished it, but I find it fascinating. And then there's your Substack, and
I have 2 Substacks actually. One is the COVID Substack, and the other is the Edge of Reason, which is basically my professional Substack where I'm discussing, all of these systems thinking things and logical analysis and stuff like that. So.
All right, and just as to kind of round things out here, this is my own. People want to support my podcast. I don't really have a payment modality, but I do have a book on
Yeah,
you by having more of these podcasts and keep this
obviously.
going. So it's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. That's a little bit self-explanatory. I think Zika is fading in the rearview mirror, but it shouldn't. There's it's still a thing. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.